I don't even know where to begin because my life has turned into something that even a soap opera writer would call too much. So, here it is. I live with my mother, who is part of some weird religious sect, in a cramped 32.7 square meter apartment. That would already be bad enough, but wait, it gets worse. My ex-husband, a 27-year-old ex-con and current drug addict, is now my mother's boyfriend. Yes, you read that right. My mother took my ex-husband for herself. And somehow, we all still live together. Let me break it down for you. This tiny, suffocating space houses 8 people. Me, my sectarian mother, my disabled father, who, yes, is somehow still here even though they are divorced. My ex-husband, who, thankfully, is only allowed to be here from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. 3 foster kids my mother took in for reasons I can't even begin to understand, and my own infant child. There is no privacy. There is no peace. There is no logic. Just a madhouse full of people who should not be living under one roof. You might be wondering how the hell I got here. Well, I wonder that too. My mother has always been odd. She raised me in her religious sect, an extremist group with strange beliefs that controlled every aspect of our lives. Leaving was never an option. I was raised to be obedient, to serve, to accept whatever insanity my mother decided was God's will. And apparently, part of that divine plan involved me getting married to a man who would eventually end up in prison for drug distribution. At first, I was young, naive, and desperate for an escape from my mother's iron grip. Marrying him seemed like a way out, but it wasn't. If anything, it was a deeper trap. He was controlling, manipulative, and worst of all, an addict. When he wasn't high, he was cold and calculating. When he was high, he was unpredictable and terrifying. When he went to prison, I thought that was my chance to break free. And for a moment, I did. But when he got out, my mother welcomed him back with open arms. Not for me, but for herself. I have no idea how it happened. One day, she was talking about how he needed redemption. The next, she was bringing him into our home, into her bed, and into our already overcrowded apartment. I tried to leave, but my mother made it clear that I had nowhere to go. She controls the finances. She has legal guardianship over the apartment. She even threatened to take my baby away if I made trouble. I had no job, no savings, and no support system. So here I am, trapped in a suffocating, nightmarish situation, watching my mother date my ex-husband while we all live in a space the size of a shoebox. And somehow, this is just the beginning. My ex-husband, let's call him Igor, is one of those people who could be charming if you didn't know any better. If you met him on the street, you might think he's just another guy trying to get by. But I know better. He spent 3 years in prison for drug distribution. And let me tell you, he didn't learn anything from it. He came back just as messed up as before, still using, still scheming, still dangerous. The only difference? Now, instead of being my problem, he's my mother's problem. Except, of course, she doesn't see it that way. She thinks she can save him. She talks about how God put him in her life so she could guide him to the light. She prays over him. She makes him drink some homemade herbal concoctions that she swears will cleanse his soul. And, worst of all, she defends him no matter what he does. And he does plenty. Since moving in, he's turned our already unbearable living situation into something even worse. He's not even legally allowed to live here, but my mother found a loophole. He's permitted to visit between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. And, of course, he stretches that rule to the limit. He comes in high, crashing around the apartment like a tornado. He picks fights with my father, mocks me whenever I try to say anything, and worst of all, he is way too interested in my baby. At first, it was little things, offering to hold them, trying to act like a doting uncle. Then, it became more uncomfortable. He started saying weird things about how kids need strong male role models. He started getting too close. And my mother? She just laughed it off. Oh, he's just joking. Don't be so sensitive. But I wasn't imagining it. I know him. I know how he thinks. And I know that somehow things are going to get worse. And the worst part? I have no way out. Now, let's talk about my mother's faith. Calling it a religious sect feels too tame. This is something else entirely. My mother believes that everything in the outside world is corrupt. She doesn't let us use store-bought soap because chemicals ruin the spirit. She makes us do these bizarre purification rituals where we have to scrub ourselves with salt and chant prayers before bed. She won't let us open the windows, even in the middle of summer, because she thinks the air outside is poisoned by sin. She controls everything: what we eat, how we dress, how we speak. If I so much as look at my phone for too long, she says I'm being seduced by the devil's distractions. And of course, she's obsessed with my baby. She believes she has a divine duty to raise my child according to her faith. She's already trying to baptize them in her own bizarre way, dipping their feet in salt water, whispering prayers over them while they sleep. I've caught her standing over my baby's crib in the middle of the night, mumbling about purity and cleansing the soul. She even tried to rename my child. She said the name I gave them wasn't holy enough. When I refused, she accused me of inviting evil into our home. But the worst part? The cult doesn't just exist inside our apartment. She has followers. Other women in the building whisper about her, follow her lead, let her dictate how they live. It's like she's built this tiny empire of control, and I'm just another prisoner inside it. And Igor? He fits right into it. He plays along with her delusions, lets her believe she's saving him, and in return, she lets him do whatever he wants. And I'm starting to realize that whatever he wants, it's not just about her. It's about me. I tried to leave, more than once, but every time, she found a way to pull me back. The first time, I thought I was being smart. I started saving money in small amounts, hiding it in an old book on the highest shelf. I figured she wouldn't notice. She never touched my things unless it was to criticize them. But one evening, I came back from a walk with my baby, and the book was lying open on my bed, empty. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Money is the root of all corruption," she said calmly, as if she hadn't just stolen from me. "You don't need it. Everything you need is right here." That was the first time I realized just how trapped I was. She controls the bank account. She handles all the rent, all the bills, everything. I have nothing in my name. No way to prove I even belong anywhere but here. And the police? Useless. I called once. I told them there was a man in my house who wasn't supposed to be there. But when they arrived, my mother turned on the tears. She clutched my arm like I was a deranged child. "My poor daughter," she sobbed. "She's been so stressed. She doesn't mean any of this." Igor played along, nodding solemnly. "She's been having episodes," he said, shaking his head like he pitied me. "You know, post-pregnancy emotions and all that." And that was it. The officers left, telling me to sort out family matters peacefully. I realized then that if I was going to escape, I would have to do it alone. But alone, I was powerless. Every attempt to get a job mysteriously failed. I applied at a grocery store down the street. Never got a call back. A week later, I saw the manager talking to my mother in the hallway. I tried babysitting, offering to help some of the other women in the building. My mother found out, confronted them, and suddenly, no one needed me anymore. And every night, Igor was still there, watching me, smirking. I stopped feeling safe in my own home. So I did the only thing I could. I started planning. I knew I couldn't do this the normal way. I had no money, no legal claim to the apartment, and nowhere to go. But I did have one thing: desperation. And sometimes, desperation makes you creative. I started small. I made sure to be the one taking out the trash, so I could check the apartment building's bulletin board. People sometimes posted odd jobs there, cleaning, pet sitting, helping elderly neighbors with shopping. My mother never paid attention to things like that, so she wouldn't know. I got lucky. An old woman on the third floor needed someone to pick up her groceries once a week. It wasn't much, but it was cash. Cash I could hide. This time, I didn't use the book. I tucked it into the lining of my winter coat, stitching it shut so no one could find it. It wasn't enough to escape. Not yet. But it was a start. Meanwhile, I played along. I nodded while my mother rambled about her divine mission. I kept my head down when Igor made his disgusting little comments. I pretended to be the obedient daughter, the one who had learned her lesson. But inside, I was counting the days. Then, one night, something happened that made me realize I couldn't wait any longer. It was late. I was in bed with my baby, trying to get them to sleep, when I heard my door creak open. At first, I thought it was my mother, but when I turned my head, I saw Igor standing there. He didn't say anything. He just stood in the doorway, watching. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would wake the baby. Then, just as silently as he had come, he left, closing the door behind him. I barely slept that night, and the next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was getting out tonight. I had no real plan, just a deep, gut-wrenching certainty that if I stayed, something awful would happen. I didn't know if I'd make it. I didn't know if I'd even survive on my own. But I knew one thing. I had to try. I waited until my mother started her evening prayer ritual in the living room. That usually kept her busy for at least an hour. Igor wasn't due to show up until 6 p.m. My father was asleep, and the foster kids were in their room. It was now or never. I grabbed the small stash of money I had hidden in my coat. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a bus ticket, hopefully to anywhere but here. I wrapped my baby in the thickest blanket I had and held them close to my chest. My heart was hammering so loudly, I thought it would give me away. Step by step, I crept toward the door. The lock clicked open. I pushed the door just enough to slip through. The hallway was empty. I took one step, then another. And then, "Where are you going?" My mother's voice sliced through the air like a knife. I turned slowly, my blood running cold. She stood in the doorway, her face eerily calm, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Anger? Disappointment? Possession? "Put the baby down and come inside," she said. Her voice was gentle, too gentle. I shook my head. My hands tightened around my child. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers twitch. "You're not thinking clearly," she said. "You have nowhere to go, no money, no plan. You'll come crawling back, just like you did before." I swallowed hard. I'd rather sleep on the street. Something flickered in her eyes. For a split second, I thought she would lunge at me. But then, footsteps. Someone was coming up the stairs. A neighbor, maybe. My mother hesitated. That hesitation was all I needed. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the bus station, breathless, heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where I was going. But for the first time in my life, I was free. I stood at the bus station, clutching my baby tightly, my breath visible in the cold night air. I had no idea where I was going. No friends, no real family outside of that nightmare apartment, no money beyond what little I had managed to hide away. The city lights blurred through my tears as I tried to gather my thoughts. I checked the bus schedule. The next bus was heading to a neighboring town in 20 minutes. I didn't know a single soul there, but it was far enough to buy me some time. I used the last of my phone's battery to look up a shelter. A woman sitting on a bench a few feet away was staring at me. She looked kind, older, maybe in her 60s. She must have seen how lost I was because she finally spoke. "Are you okay, dear?" I wasn't, but I couldn't break down now. "I just need to get away from home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, as if she understood. "Bad situation?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Good for you," she said simply. "Getting out. Some people never do." The bus arrived, screeching to a halt in front of us. I thanked her with a small nod before stepping on, taking a seat near the back. As the doors shut and the bus pulled away from the station, I let out a shaky breath. I was gone. The shelter was nothing like home. It was small but clean, warm, safe. The woman at the front desk asked no questions beyond the basics. Name, age, whether I needed help, whether I was in danger. Yes. She let me in, showed me to a shared room with two other women and their children. One of them, a tired-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes, gave me a small, knowing smile. "First night?" she asked. I nodded. "It gets easier," she said. "For now, just sleep." I barely remember lying down, only the feeling of my child curled up against me, the warmth of a blanket, and a sheer exhaustion that finally dragged me into sleep. The next morning, I woke up in a panic, my mind still trapped in survival mode. For a split second, I thought I was back in that tiny apartment, that Igor would come stumbling in, high and violent, that my mother would be standing over me, demanding I return. But it was quiet, safe. I exhaled, forcing my body to relax. But the fear didn't leave me. What if my mother was already looking for me? What if she reported me missing? What if she tried to take my child away? I had no job, no savings, no plan. Just the clothes on my back and a desperate need to never go back. I spent the day talking to a counselor at the shelter. She was patient. She listened. She didn't judge. "You did the right thing leaving," she told me, "but we need to make sure you stay safe." She helped me make a plan, a new identity, in a way, a job search, legal help, a way to finally cut ties with my mother and Igor for good. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in my life, I had hope. After some time, I made the mistake of turning my phone on. It exploded with messages. "Mother, come home. You don't know what you're doing." "Igor, you ungrateful little b asterisk asterisk asterisk. You think you can take my kid away from me? Asterisk. Mother, I forgive you. Come back before it's too late." "Igor, you think you're smart, but you're not. You can't hide from me." I turned my phone off and nearly threw up. He wouldn't find me. He couldn't. Right? Within a week, I had a job. It wasn't much, just cleaning rooms at a small motel, but it was enough to afford food, to save for a real place of my own. The exhaustion was a different kind than before. Not fear, not helplessness, just hard work. And I could live with that. Every day was a battle. My mother had conditioned me to believe I couldn't survive without her, that the world was dangerous, that I was weak. But she was wrong. I wasn't weak. I was finally free. It took months, but I built something new. I found a tiny apartment of my own, a studio barely bigger than a closet, but it was mine. I got a better job, saved more money, learned how to live without fear. I changed my phone number, blocked my mother, blocked Igor. For the first time, I could breathe. My child grew, smiled, laughed. They would never know the nightmare we had escaped from. And neither would I, because I wasn't going back. Not ever. One night, months later, a new message appeared in my inbox. A fake number, no name, but I knew exactly who it was. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. I didn't respond. I didn't have to, because I knew the truth. I had already won.